Throughout history, power has always sought new ways to brand itself onto flesh. But among all the instruments of domination, the whip, the chain, the sword, none cut as deeply as the act of castration. It was more than a punishment. It was a declaration. A cold, deliberate message from the rulers of men: you will live, but you will never be whole again. In the ancient cities of Mesopotamia, the Assyrian kings wielded this weapon of silence with calculated precision. After battle, they didn't just kill the enemy, they reshaped them. Warriors once proud and defiant were dragged before the throne, their screams echoing down the palace halls as their manhood was taken. The blood on the stone floor was not merely proof of victory. It was the birthmark of submission, a ritual that told all who watched, rebellion ends where legacy dies. Across the East, in the vast empire of China, castration became an industry of obedience. In the marble chambers of the Forbidden City, the eunuch stood, smooth, hollow, yet indispensable. They served emperors who trusted no man unaltered. Within the gilded silence of those corridors, the absence of masculinity became the price of proximity to power. The empire had found its most loyal servants in those who had nothing left to lose. Farther west, in the Byzantine palaces of Constantinople, this cruel arithmetic of control was refined into politics. Princes, generals, and rivals alike were rendered harmless, their ambitions drained along with their blood. In a world where lineage meant legitimacy, the removal of seed meant the removal of destiny. Castration became the cleanest coup: a man could live, even thrive, but he would never rule. Through every empire, the message was identical, even if the tools differed. The blade could be bronze, steel, or fire-heated iron, but its purpose was eternal. To carve hierarchy into the human body. To reduce defiance to memory. To ensure that power did not merely kill, but rewrote what it meant to exist. It was not the pain that terrified people most, nor even death itself. It was the knowledge that one's bloodline would end, that one's very essence could be erased with a single stroke. In that sense, castration was not just a mutilation of flesh. It was the empire's most perfect invention, a ritual that destroyed the body, silenced the spirit, and turned human beings into monuments of obedience. And so, through centuries of dust and empire, the same truth lingered: the sharp edge of history has always been aimed not at the neck, but at the future. In the ancient empires of Rome, Persia, and Arabia, punishment was theater, and the stage was flesh. Every empire had its own choreography of cruelty, but few spectacles drew such crowds as the castration ritual. It began not in secret chambers, but in the open squares where the empire displayed its authority in the language of agony. The blade came first. Forged of bronze, steel, or the famed Damascus metal, it gleamed in the sun like a serpent ready to strike. Executioners treated their craft as a sacred profession, their tools polished to a mirror's shine, their hands steady as priests at an altar. Around them, soldiers formed a circle of order while the mob pressed in from the edges: merchants, slaves, nobles, all bound by the same morbid curiosity, the need to see what power looked like when it drew blood. The condemned was brought forth, stripped, and bound to a stone platform still slick from the last performance. His breath came in short bursts, his eyes searched the crowd, perhaps for mercy, perhaps for a familiar face. There would be neither. A herald shouted his crimes: betrayal, blasphemy, or simply standing in the way of power. Then came the silence, that dreadful pause before the blade descended. One stroke was all it took. The mark of a true master was swiftness, hesitation meant more suffering, and unnecessary mess displeased the gods of order. The crowd recoiled, then leaned forward again, drawn by that primitive fascination with the border between life and death. But the ritual was not complete. From beside the platform, attendants lifted a cauldron of oil, bubbling and spitting like the breath of some infernal creature. Steam rose in golden clouds, carrying the scent of heat and inevitability. The executioner stepped forward and, with a deliberate calmness, poured the scalding liquid onto the open wound. The sound was unforgettable, a wet, sizzling hiss followed by a scream that pierced stone and sky alike. Flesh cooked, smoke curled, and the smell, sweet, greasy, nauseating, drifted through the air like incense at a dark mass. Those who fainted were revived to witness their fate, for the empire demanded endurance as much as obedience. Some victims survived, their bodies sealed by the fire, their souls forever scarred. Survival, however, was no mercy. It was a sentence, a life of servitude, silence, and ghostly half-existence. And when it was done, the crowd dispersed, murmuring prayers and gossip in equal measure. The blade was wiped clean, the oil reheated, and the platform washed for the next man. In that world, survival was not triumph. It was the privilege of living long enough to remember how completely you had been unmade. By the Middle Ages, punishment had become a performance, and fire its most eloquent language. In the squares of Europe and Byzantium, justice was not whispered in courts, but screamed into the air. The condemned were led in chains through cobblestone streets toward the waiting forge, where the blacksmith's hammer rang like a church bell. Each strike against the iron was a prelude to agony, a reminder that the tools of trade and the tools of torment were forged in the same fire. The square filled with people long before the execution began. Bakers left their stalls, children sat on their fathers' shoulders, nobles leaned from their balconies. It was not enough to punish, the punishment had to be seen. The crowd wanted the spectacle, the moment when sin became smoke. They came for moral cleansing, but left carrying the scent of burning flesh. The condemned was brought forward, a thief, a heretic, a rival. His face was pale, hollowed by days without sleep. He was forced to kneel before a wooden frame, chains locking his limbs in place. A herald stepped onto the platform and began to read the charges, his voice booming across the square. The words turned crimes into ceremony. Each syllable transformed cruelty into righteousness, each pause giving the crowd time to nod and whisper, "Yes, he deserves it." Behind the herald, the blacksmith prepared the instrument, a circular iron rod, heated until it glowed white. Sparks leapt like fireflies as he lifted it from the coals. The air shimmered with heat. The crowd fell silent, all eyes reflecting that red light that danced between justice and madness. The executioner stepped forward. The condemned's eyes widened as he felt the breath of heat near his skin. Then came the touch, the iron pressed against flesh, searing through skin and muscle. The sound was neither scream nor voice but something deeper, primal, an animal sound that no language could contain. The stench filled the square. People covered their mouths, yet no one turned away. The iron lifted, leaving behind a blackened crater where identity once lived. The man was alive, but altered, no longer criminal, no longer whole. The crowd exhaled as one, the collective relief of watching someone else's pain cleanse their own fear. When it was over, the square returned to its rhythms. Vendors reopened their stalls, priests offered prayers, and children laughed again. But as the sun set, the red glow of the forge lingered in their eyes. They had come to witness justice. Instead, they had learned how easily justice and cruelty can share the same flame. In the alleys of old Beijing, where morning fog curls through narrow streets, a small wooden sign swings above a door painted red and black. It bears no words, only a symbol, a knife and a cord. Inside, behind heavy curtains, the sound of boiling water and murmured prayers fills the air. This is the shop of the Dao Shifu, the knife master. To the desperate, he offers not death, but transformation. The ritual begins before sunrise. The father bows deeply, pressing his forehead to the floor. His hands tremble as he counts the silver coins, the sum of years of poverty. The mother does not speak, her eyes are dry, hollow, resigned. Between them stands the boy, 6 years old, small and fragile, his hair tied neatly, his face scrubbed clean. He does not understand the bargain. Only that his parents look at him with a love so desperate it feels like mourning. The knife master gestures to his assistants. They lead the boy behind a silk screen painted with cranes. The air smells of herbs, ash, and iron. He is bathed in warm water until his skin glows, then laid upon a heated platform. His limbs are tied gently but firmly. A silk cord is looped around his waist, another drawn tight around his genitals, white silk that will soon turn red. The master selects his blade, small and curved like the crescent moon, its edge shimmering in the dim light. He leans close to the boy's ear and whispers the ritual question 3 times, "Do you agree?" The boy nods each time, though he does not truly know what he agrees to. Consent has been reduced to performance, mercy to illusion. Then comes the silence, the deep, terrible silence before the first movement of steel. The knife arcs downward in a single, practiced stroke. Blood surges, then stops as the master works with precision and speed. He inserts a small bronze plug into the wound, ensuring that life, barely, will continue. The assistants move quickly, wiping, binding, burning herbs to mask the smell. The mother listens from outside, her nails digging into her palms, her lips whispering prayers to every god she can name. Hours later, the door opens. The boy lies still, his face pale as paper. The master nods once. He lives. The father falls to his knees in gratitude and shame. Outside, the sun climbs over the rooftops, turning the mist gold. The boy stirs, eyes fluttering open. His breath is shallow, but steady. In the forbidden city, there will be a place for him, somewhere between servant and ghost. And for his family, there will be rice on the table. For the boy, survival itself has become the price of sacrifice. Across continents and centuries, there existed punishments so savage they blurred the boundary between man and animal. In Europe's medieval arenas, Africa's tribal enclosures, and the humid courts of Southeast Asia, the condemned were not simply executed, they were fed. The arena was always prepared with ceremony. The ground soaked in old blood, the stench of rot mingling with incense. Wooden stakes marked the boundaries of justice. Chains clanked as the prisoner was dragged forward, stripped, bound, trembling. He was no longer a man, not in the eyes of those who came to watch. He was meat. The gates opened, and the beasts emerged, dogs bred for war, boars starved for days, or in some kingdoms, trained monkeys with sharpened teeth and human eyes full of eerie intelligence. Their handlers stood nearby with whips and torches, guiding hunger like priests conducting a ritual. The crowd roared, 1,000 voices calling not for mercy, but for spectacle. The condemned often tried to speak, to beg, to curse, to cry out, but the roar of the crowd drowned every sound. The scholar, standing among them, saw only faces illuminated by flame and frenzy. What had begun as justice had transformed into communion, a collective surrender to cruelty. Then came the moment everyone waited for, the first strike. The dogs lunged, jaws snapping with wet, bone-cracking sounds. The boars charged, their tusks gleaming red. The crowd surged forward, gasping, cheering, shuddering. Flesh tore. Screams rose. The smell of blood grew heavy, metallic and hot, carried on the wind like incense from a dark altar. It did not end quickly. The beasts were trained not to kill at once but to tear and retreat, prolonging the torment as if savoring their meal. The executioners knew that pain was part of the performance. Each cry from the condemned brought another wave of applause, proof that the crowd was still human enough to feel, but not enough to care. When at last the body fell silent, only the sound of panting animals and crackling torches remained. The handlers pulled the beasts away, their muzzles slick with blood. The scholar stood motionless, unable to write. Around him, the spectators began to disperse, their faces flushed, their eyes bright, as if they had witnessed something divine. In that moment, one truth burned in his mind: they had not destroyed a criminal. They had buried humanity itself. The line between beast and man had vanished in the heat of the crowd's desire, leaving behind nothing but the echo of screams and the satisfaction of those who believed they had seen justice done. In the age of alchemists, when kingdoms searched for gold in the veins of the earth and immortality in the veins of men, a new kind of cruelty was born, one that required no blade, no fire, only time. Across Egypt, the Middle East, and Europe, learned men in silk and scholars in soot-stained robes discovered that the elements themselves could unmake a body. It began in silence. The condemned was restrained in a stone cell, the air thick with the scent of vinegar and ash. The alchemist practitioner moved with slow precision, mixing his concoction, lye from burnt wood, acid distilled from wine, or a paste of crushed herbs laced with arsenic. The mixture bubbled faintly, releasing a sharp, sour smell that clung to the skin like invisible fire. There were no crowds now, no roaring arenas or iron brands. This was a private ritual, quiet, deliberate, almost scientific. The liquid was applied to the flesh with cloth or brush, layer upon layer, each stroke measured, each pause prolonged. At first came the burning, a searing invisible heat. Then the pain deepened, not the clean strike of a weapon, but the slow invasion of something unseen, something alive. The condemned would writhe, not from shock, but from realization, the body was dissolving, not bleeding. The skin blistered, cracked, peeled away. Muscles quivered beneath it, pale and trembling. The smell thickened, sweet and nauseating, the scent of decay that even the incense could not hide. The alchemist took notes with careful detachment, recording how long before the victim lost speech, when the eyes rolled back, when the body began to quiet itself in exhaustion. Days passed. The wounds did not heal, they spread. The chemicals continued their work long after application, eating through layers unseen, leaving behind blackened traces like parchment burned by candle flame. The condemned would beg not for death, but for the numbness that never came. Sleep brought no mercy, only the sensation of slow corrosion, the mind aware of every inch of vanishing flesh. When death finally arrived, it came softly, not with screams, but with stillness. The air around the body seemed to hum faintly, the final reaction between flesh and element complete. The alchemists would call it purification. The scholar, standing nearby, called it what it truly was, the art of turning a man into nothing, one drop at a time. It was the perfect cruelty, quiet, odorous, infinite. Pain that left no echo, only the lingering scent of what once lived. It was agony refined into philosophy, a death without sound, but not without memory. For this was suffering transmuted, the alchemy of pain. There are punishments that slice, and punishments that burn, but the most dreadful are those that crush. In the dark centuries of Europe, when power was measured in blood and spectacle, some rulers chose the slow weight of stone over the swift mercy of steel. It was not the edge that terrified people most, but the pressure, the long, unbearable descent from man to dust. The condemned was dragged into a cold courtyard at dawn. The stones were already waiting, glistening with dew. There were no flames, no banners, only the sound of iron chains scraping against marble. The crowd gathered in silence, drawn not by curiosity but by something darker, the need to witness power made visible. The executioner stood beside the stone table, his arms bare, his mallet heavy. He was not a brute but an artisan of suffering. He knew how much weight a human body could endure before bones surrendered. Two assistants forced the prisoner down, spreading his limbs across the slab. The man's breath came fast, clouds in the cold morning air. He looked not at the executioner but at the sky, as if hoping it would remember him. A flat stone was placed upon his chest, the first note in a slow symphony of pain. Then another. And another. With each addition, the body strained, ribs creaking like wood under a storm. The crowd flinched as the man's breath grew ragged, his eyes bulging, veins rising beneath his skin. No blade, no wound, just pressure, invisible, unstoppable. The executioner's mallet struck the final stone, forcing it down an inch. A sound followed, wet, soft, final. It was not a scream but the air leaving a body that could hold no more. Some in the crowd crossed themselves. Others simply stared, entranced by the quiet efficiency of it all. In other places, horses were used. The condemned was pinned beneath hooves, the animals made to step forward one by one until the bones gave way. The sound of splintering echoed through the square, sharp and sickening. There was no artistry in it, only the raw physics of dominance. When it was done, the executioner stepped back, his face unreadable. The scholar stood apart, pale, his hand trembling as he wrote, "Power has no need to cut, it crushes." The stones were removed one by one, revealing what was left, not a man, but a shape, pressed flat by authority itself. In that silence, even the air seemed heavy. For what had been destroyed was not only flesh, but defiance, the weight of rule made manifest, grinding the soul of humanity into the earth it once stood upon. In the dying centuries of Rome, when faith and madness danced as one, there arose a cult whose devotion demanded more than prayer, it demanded blood. They called themselves the Galli, priests of the mother goddess Cybele, and on the day of blood, the dies sanguinis, their temple became a place where divinity and delirium met. At dawn, the city stirred uneasily. From the marble steps of Cybele's temple came the sound of drums, slow at first, then faster, until it shook the air like a heartbeat gone wild. Flutes shrieked in dissonant harmony, the music rising and falling like waves of fever. Crowds gathered, not as believers, but as witnesses to something ancient and terrible. Inside, the priests whirled in trance. Their white robes, once pure, were already streaked with red. They danced until exhaustion blurred into ecstasy, spinning beneath golden mosaics that gleamed like burning suns. Their hair hung loose, faces painted in ash and wine, eyes vacant, seeing not the temple around them, but something beyond. As the drums reached their frenzy, the air filled with chants, calls to the mother, to rebirth, to the end of flesh. The priests seized sharp stones and ritual blades, lifting them to the heavens before striking their own bodies in rapture. It was not agony they felt but release, the violent unmaking of the self in pursuit of the divine. The scholar, standing at the edge of the chamber, could not move. He had witnessed punishment, justice, cruelty, but never this, suffering transformed into worship. Blood ran across the marble floor, pooling at the foot of the goddess's statue. Incense smoke curled upward, mingling with the metallic scent in the air. The rhythm of drums and flutes grew louder, faster, more chaotic, until the sound became something inhuman, a heartbeat too vast to belong to any single creature. One by one, the priests fell to their knees, trembling and weeping. Their cries were not of pain, but of joy. They had given up everything, not for empire, not for survival, but for faith. In their delirium, they believed they had touched the divine, that through destruction they had achieved creation. And then, as if the gods themselves drew breath, silence fell. The drums stopped. The flutes hung in mid-note. Only the faint drip of blood echoed through the marble hall. The scholar stepped forward slowly, his parchment wet with red, his face lit by the dying torches. Outside, Rome carried on, chariots clattered, merchants shouted, unaware that in this temple, men had chosen to unmake themselves for a glimpse of eternity. And in that silence, broken only by the slow rhythm of dripping blood, the sacred and the monstrous became one.